If you are pregnant or you've recently had a baby, this podcast is for you. I am your host, Cath Bequee, a physiotherapist working in women's health and mum of three. Inside my online program, Fitness Mama, I just love helping support women to care for their bodies during pregnancy, prepare their bodies for birth, and support their after-birth recovery, helping them feel confident and strong inside out during this important stage of their lives. In this podcast, join me each week as we dive into all things pregnancy care, childbirth, and postnatal recovery, helping you through every step of the journey. It is absolutely possible to feel amazing and confident in our bodies during this motherhood journey, and I want that for you. Come and say hi to me on Instagram at FitnessMama, and let's dive into today's episode. Hello and welcome back to the Pregnancy, Birth and Recovery podcast. So today I'm chatting all about Caesarean birth recovery. This has really got some actionable tips for a smoother postpartum recovery. So whether or not you're a new mum who has had a belly birth or you're simply interested in postnatal recovery, this episode is for you. Now, this episode is actually an episode I recorded with the lovely Amberlee from The Power of Birth. And this is for her podcast, Can We Talk About This? So do check out her podcast. It's real talk about maternal health, and there's some brilliant episodes on there. It was episode number 40, so this is a rerun from my interview with Amberlee. But I wanted to share it here because as I said, it's really, we discussed the recovery path with Caesarean birth. We discussed some signs and symptoms to be aware of. We discuss some safe sequential and functional exercises postpartum. So there's some really great bits of information for this podcast. Before we do dive into this episode, I do just want to thank each and every one of you for being an amazing listener, whether or not this is your first episode or you've listened to over 200 episodes. Thank you so much for your support along the way. This podcast is now over 3 years old. We've released over 200 episodes, and I thank you for each of you who've left a rating and review, because sharing, rating and reviewing this podcast is probably one of the most important ways to help this podcast reach more people. So if you know someone who's pregnant or you know someone who's had a baby, just consider whether or not you want to share this podcast with them, because at the end of the day, if we can help one more pregnant or postnatal mama have a better motherhood experience, then that is amazing. Okay, let's dive into this episode.
In 2020, 37% of all women giving birth in Australia had a caesarean section. And despite this high rate of belly births, we often aren't prepared for the demanding recovery, and little information is given around healing the incision, postnatal exercise, and even pelvic floor. So today I'm chatting with Cath Bequee, a physiotherapist working in women's health, your host of the Pregnancy, Birth and Recovery podcast, founder of Fitness Mama, and mum of three herself. She has over 16 years of experience guiding mamas through their pregnancy, fitness journeys, and postnatal and pelvic floor rehabilitation. Cath, welcome.
Oh, thanks, Amber. Thank you for having me.
So I'm actually really curious to know a little bit about your story and what led you to becoming a women's health physio.
Well, I can't believe I say this, but I've been in women's health right from when I did my uni placements. I started off my physio career thinking, oh yeah, I'll do sports physio, just like every other physio student out there, not knowing what physio entailed. But I soon discovered, I worked during uni years, I worked as a sports trainer on the football field. So in the middle of winter, I'd be out there, freezing cold, horizontal wind, horizontal rain, and having to massage these sweaty hamstrings and tape up dirty, muddy ankles. And I was just like, ugh, this is not my not my jam. And I did an elective in the women's health clinic, and from that moment I loved it. So my career did take, I've gone down the hospital route, I've done a lot of neuro rehab, so neurological rehabilitation, and but I've always worked part-time in a women's health clinic, doing a lot of Pilates for pregnancy, postpartum. And then it wasn't until I had the birth of my first baby that I realised how little I knew, even though I was a physio working in the women's health space. I then decided to go and do postgraduate training in pelvic floor rehab. And from that moment on, it's all been about women's health, and I love it. It's just such a beautiful area. You know, it's not about like nothing against my sports physio counterparts, but like for me, I just love helping women with this area because A, it's often undertreated and underdiagnosed. B, it can change someone's confidence, their mental health. It can have an impact throughout life. And I think we don't treat this area enough. And I think in the past, women, once they've had a baby, they might have their 6-week check by the doctor, and then they're told, and this was me at my 6-week checkup, okay, you're doing really well. I'll see you when you next have a baby. And I thought, my whole body feels so different. My whole body feels foreign to me. I feel like a whole new person, yet you're telling me everything's fine and you'll see me when I next get pregnant? Like, what? So this is where, like, I feel that postnatal rehab is just so important and can make such a powerful difference in our life. You know, we spend so much time preparing for birth, preparing our nursery, getting the baby's clothes and the right pram. And I think if we can spend just a little bit more time focusing on our rehab and investing back into our body, it can just have amazing benefits to every facet of our life. So, yeah, I love talking about this. So thank you for having me on.
Yeah, and I'm like nodding the whole way through you talking just because I'm like, yes, preach. Like, you're obviously preaching to the choir, but for anyone listening, this is it. Like, this is why we have these conversations. We get a lot wrong, I would say, in terms of prenatal, postnatal care, and we lack pelvic health knowledge just in general, you know, whether or not you have a baby. So today we are focusing on cesarean sections. Last month was Cesarean Section Awareness Month. And so I just thought, how good would it be to be able to have a conversation just all about cesareans? And we can't separate pelvic floor from that, which we will get into as well. But I often find after, I would just say birth in general, but particularly cesarean sections, that a lot of women say, well, I wish someone told me. So from a women's health perspective, what are some normal things to expect when you have a cesarean section?
Yeah, I think a lot of them are quite well known in terms of it is major abdominal surgery, and the recovery, like there is a recovery process. You're going to have some incision pain and healing. You're going to need to be aware of the hygiene in that area and following, you know, care instructions from your doctor. There's soreness, there's weakness, there's difficulty in coughing. Laughing can be uncomfortable. So I think they're quite well known, which is great because it is major abdominal surgery, and I think it needs to be treated as such, and there should be a postnatal care plan. If you've had a cesarean, hopefully you understand some of the key factors, and I'm sure we'll get into some of them today, hopefully we will, in terms of how you can best help support your body in that healing process.
So then what are some common physical changes and challenges women may experience after such surgery?
Well, let's start off with pain, because I think that's a big one. So I used to work in the wards after, on the postnatal wards, and a lot of what we're helping women with there is, you know, discussing how the pain can be settled. So obviously speaking to your doctor and your care providers and your midwives about pain relief. But from a physical point of view, should we go through some quick tips in terms of what to do in those first few days to help manage the pain? So one of them would be a log roll to get out of bed, because often that sit up to get out of bed can be really uncomfortable. And I'm not a huge fan of those monkey hangers, those overbed monkey hangers, because that's quite a lot of hard work on your upper body, and actually like if you try to use that, it does require quite a bit of ab strength to pull yourself up. So I love a log roll. So you roll onto your side first, and you'll probably have an up-down bed head, with the little button. So you get your bed head up, you roll onto your side, and then it is so easy. Well, it's not so easy. It's so easy for me to say, but then it's a lot easier to just let your legs drop over and use your arms to push yourself up into sitting. So log rolls, amazing. And if that can continue for the first few weeks, like when you get home as well, I know it sounds so little, but this is even something we could do in pregnancy too, because your abs are stretched, especially later pregnancy, and you're actually quite weak, and it's quite hard to just do that sit up out of bed. So a log roll from pregnancy through to that first 6 weeks is a lovely one. So that would be your first. We talked about pain relief. The other quick tip as well is to support the wound. So if you're going to cough, if you feel a cough's coming or a sneeze or a laugh, you could grab a little rolled up towel or a pillow and just pop it against your incision site before you cough. And it's a really nice, simple one. Bursts of horizontal rest, amazing. So our body has been through so much, and I recommend this even if you have a vaginal birth. For the first 6 weeks, if you can allocate 5-minute bursts of horizontal rest, particularly in the afternoon, when you're tired, when your toddler's starting to get a bit cranky, whatever it is, if you can lie down, read a book to your toddler for 5 minutes on the couch or whatever it might be, just to get your feet up and the weight of gravity off the wound, that can also be really helpful.
So I remember you're obviously speaking to someone who hasn't had a cesarean section. So I'm coming from, I guess, an outsider's perspective, but chatting to a lot of women, so in prior, I would say maybe like my mum's generation, after a cesarean section, like there's no way you'd be getting out of bed in that first day. Whereas I find these days they kind of want you up and at it like as soon as possible. Why would we be doing that now?
Yeah, so that early mobilisation, your doctor and your healthcare team will talk you through when a good time to get out of bed is, but we want to do that to help prevent blood clots and the swelling aspect. So that is actually just really important from that point of view. Mm-hmm. And again, it's that balance, isn't it? Yes, early mobilisation is important, but so is rest. So finding that balance. And so with walking, for example, and again, this is my recommendation if you had a vaginal or a cesarean, but it's to build up the walking gradually. I think so often you might not do much for a week or so, you're in discomfort, and then 2 weeks after giving birth, you're feeling good, pain's under control, you had a good night's sleep, I'm going to go for a walk. So you might set off for 30 minutes, 40 minutes, an hour, and you think, oh my gosh, there's no grey area. So I really do recommend building it up gradually, 5 minutes extra each week. So for the first week, 5-minute little walks around the hospital ward, around your home, perhaps around the block. Second week, it'll be 10 minutes. And I don't mean 10 minutes and that's it for the whole day, like 10 minutes in the morning, maybe 10 minutes lunch, 10 minutes afternoon, but just having a 10-minute burst in that second week postpartum, and including some horizontal rest, that can be, it's all about helping to nourish your body and not deplete it further. So I've had feedback, and from what I did, that just felt amazing. And then third week, 15 minutes, fourth week, 20. So by the time you get to 6 weeks, you're doing 30-minute bursts of walking, and that's lovely.
So I guess that's relative to postnatal exercise, right? So you sort of talked about walking, but how soon after a cesarean section can women start to do other things in terms of maybe recovery exercises or things other than walking? Because I know a lot of women go back to the team sports and things like that, and it makes me stress when I hear someone has just had a baby and they're back at it not long after. But yeah, what are some typical things you would recommend? Inside
my online workout program, I do have some gentle core connect exercises that are safe from I say 1 to 6 weeks postpartum, or 2 to 6 weeks. But then I don't call them workouts. These core connect, they can be as simple as some pelvic floor exercises, some deep breathing exercises, some functional exercises. So stuff that we're actually doing on a day-to-day basis anyway. Like we need to be able to do a bridge, for example, where you bend your knees up, feet are on the bed, and you lift up your hips. So there's these functional exercises that we need to be able to do. So I've got some nice core connect exercises, but my recommendation is don't do proper workout in inverted commas until 6 weeks onwards, just to get that medical tick of approval, make sure that incision, that, the abdominal wound's healing well and your recovery is going well.
Would you say that, because obviously 6 weeks is the generic answer for everybody, and you've just said everybody's recovery can look different. I would assume that most people, almost all people I know of anyway, are cleared at 6 weeks, but isn't that when they should be then going and seeking some advice from a women's health physio?
Yeah, 100%. So I feel sports, let's say you've had a hip replacement or you're an athlete and you've had a knee reconstruction. Generally, there's a really good rehab protocol. You might start your walking, then you build in some strength work, and then you might start some gentle run-throughs, and then you might get back into training with the rest of the footy team. So it's a very sequential, progressive situation based on your needs. But when it comes to postnatal rehab, 6 weeks, get back exercising, go for it. So if we can start to adopt that approach, and this is why I call it postnatal rehab. So yes, from 6 weeks onwards, sure, you might be ready to start your, attending something that, and again, I wouldn't suggest going straight back into your normal pre-pregnancy exercise. Let's start with something you feel confident with. So you might look, in the ideal world, it would be amazing if every woman could have a pelvic floor assessment of some sort with a physio at that 6 week mark. And they're actually, in some countries, they are offered this as part of their, with the government. Sadly, not in Australia yet. But if you've had a caesarean, don't feel that your pelvic floor is necessarily protected. You've still had 9 months of baby weight sitting on top of your pelvic floor. You've had, 9 months of everything stretching. So I have seen a lot of women in the clinic with issues or concerns around incontinence, leaking, those sorts of sensations. It could be sexual pain. It could be discomfort around the pelvis. So if you've got any of those, I guess, little red flags, or if you're unsure, always go check it out. Because even if it's just that reassurance, you're doing really well, your body's recovering really well, let's start you with these, few exercises and get you stronger. That can be a big relief for a lot of women to hear. So, yes, from 6 weeks onwards, find a trusted source that is specialised in the women's health rehab space and start a program that's graduated, that suits you and your body. And it's so different once you have baby, isn't it? Here we are talking about exercising after birth. At 6 weeks, you're probably feeling so sleep deprived, exhausted. It's the last thing on your mind. And this is a whole different topic. And I remember it was a massive transition for me to exercise as a new mum, because my whole notion of what exercise had to change.
Yeah.
It was no longer going for a beautiful walk with my friend and having a coffee afterwards, going to the gym, doing a workout, having a shower, going to the supermarket on the way home. It was all different. And suddenly I was, I remember being at home with my a baby and 2 toddlers, thinking, if I don't do 10 minutes of exercise at home right now with my kids next to me, it ain't going to happen. So whatever it is for you, finding what fits with your lifestyle, what feels easy, because if it feels easy and achievable, then we're more likely to do it, and then we're more likely to set up this habit, this muscle that we're building, habit muscle, I should say, and then we're more likely to, achieve our goals, whatever that they might be. And it might just be that your goal is you want to feel more human again. You might want to release a few endorphins and feel better mentally again. It's not always about losing your baby weight and, getting your bikini body back and all those sorts of things. And I even cringe when I say that because there's so many other reasons we want to exercise after having a baby.
I certainly did feel that shift after I had my babies. Like I found the shift went from sort of external, superficial, what do I look like, to, I want to be strong. I want to be able to do this without pain or do this without being, feeling like I'm overexerting myself, or, I wanted to get to a point within my body internally, the invisible things that you can't see, and be able to do those. And so, shifting your mindset around exercise, like absolutely. And I really felt that as well. I was going to ask you, so aside from like the regular pregnancy pressures around your abdomen, what would be the difference having a cesarean section for your abdomen then? Like, are there other things that you have to look out for? Like, can you not be doing crunches and things like you regularly would be if you had a vaginal birth? Like, sort of, are there differences, I guess?
This episode is brought to you by Baby Bee, Australian-owned and designed prams combining quality, safety and style. Not only does Baby Bee let you try their prams at home with free returns for 9 months, yes, that's 9 months, they also offer an industry-leading 3-year warranty for total peace of mind. With thousands of 5-star reviews, around-the-clock customer care, and up to $300 of free accessories with every pram, what are you waiting for? Go visit www.babybeeonline.com and check them out for yourself. And yes, for listeners of the podcast, there is a 20% discount code. Enter FITBEE, F-I-T-B-E-E 20 at checkout, and T's and C's apply. Good question. Look, on the whole, and again, this is generalising, if you've had a vaginal birth, you may need to focus more on your pelvic floor side of things, but your abs are going to be so weak too. Like, I remember my total jelly belly after having a baby. I had vaginal birth, and you're feeling as weak as a kitten. And caesarean birth, same. Maybe your weakest link is your abdominal strength area, and your pelvic floor is a little bit better. But the exercises that I provide my mums, they're not, like, I don't have exercises just for you if you've had a vaginal birth and just for you if you've had a caesarean birth, because they're all, if you're doing core exercises properly and functional exercises and deep breathing and you're getting a beautiful activation of your core muscles, that's going to involve your pelvic floor and your abs all together in a beautiful way that supports your body and your back. As you said, we don't want to have back pain. We want to get your glutes and you're stronger around your pelvis if you've had pelvic girdle pain. So, look, yes, there could be slight differences, but on the whole, and this is where when I provide an exercise, I provide levels for my new mums. So you might do the exercise, and for the first 2 weeks, you're at level 1. And then, okay, I'm feeling a bit stronger, I'm going to go to level 2. So I think it's less about thinking, because very rarely do we do an excellent exercise and it isolates one muscle group. Like, we want to choose exercises that are functional and that will help our body as a whole. So, yeah, I don't generally provide different exercises for you if you've had a caesarean versus a vaginal birth, but there are different considerations, definitely.
Interesting. So then what are some signs and symptoms that something's not quite right around, I guess, having a caesarean or your incision, and what should you do in this case?
Well, if there's any pain, swelling, redness, soreness, discomfort, or you're just not sure about your wound, please do go check it out. Like, that would be just the number one. And that's a doctor, or if you're part of a team midwives, like whoever it is that's been looking after you since you've had your baby. From a physio point of view, look, if not including the wound itself. If you're getting any stiffness around your pelvis, you've got lower backache, perhaps you're finding your posture's not what it used to be and you can't stand up nice and tall like you used to be. Perhaps you're finding you don't have the strength to lift up the capsule in your baby and the pram or whatever it might be. And I'm talking from 6 weeks onwards, because in that first six-week period, I only recommend you lift whatever is your baby weight, like your baby. And that's if you've had a vaginal or a caesarean. I really don't think women who've had any type of birth should be hauling prams in and out the car, capsules. Like, it's too much on any of us, let alone if we've just given birth, no matter what way. So from 6 weeks onwards, if you're just finding your life is impacted from weakness or soreness, or you're feeling your posture's not great, then let's get you on a bit of a plan.
And so obviously the plan would be sort of catered to you and your specific needs in your body. But can you maybe give us a rough rundown of what a generic plan might look like?
Yeah. I think all women who've had a baby should be doing a combination of core strengthening, flexibility work, because you're probably going to be stiff and sore in your upper body, and, if you're breastfeeding and nursing and changing nappies. They want to include functional exercises, so squats and all those important muscle groups, and strength as well. So that's where walking, for example, is a brilliant exercise after having a baby. Absolutely brilliant. It's free, gets you out in the fresh air, releases some endorphins. You can do it with a friend. It's brilliant, and definitely do it. But perhaps you might need something to complement that then works on your inner strength, that inner core, your strength. We want to build your body back up again for future pregnancies, for menopause that's on your doorstep, so that you can run around with your kids and play Tiggy at the park. And I think it does. My hope is that every woman would be able to access some sort of postnatal rehab program, whether or not that's a one-on-one at your physio clinic, which is obviously perhaps on the more expensive side, or online, which is what I do. I have provided this lower cost, and there are lots on YouTube as well that are free. Again, just make sure it's from a trusted source. Like, sometimes I watch them and I think, oh, please don't do that. So, it's that combination, flexibility, strength, core, and cardio, amazing.
And so when people think of women's health physios, and they know what they are, because people tend to still not know what they are these days, people know that they sort of work with your pelvic floor. So if you've had a cesarean section, I know that a lot of the time, I've had a C-section, I don't need to worry about my pelvic floor. Obviously they do, and we've sort of touched on that, but why would a mother who's had a cesarean go and see a physio? Like, what role does that play for them?
If you've had issues with leaking, prolapse, or any of those pelvic health concerns, then probably an internal vaginal examination would be the best, gold standard, if you chose. The next level is having a real-time ultrasound. So they can it's like the ultrasound where they look at the babies, but we put it in a different position and we look at your pelvic floor muscles. And we can actually look at your pelvic floor muscles when they're relaxed and then when they're activated. And it's not as thorough as an internal examination. It doesn't give us as much information. But if you've had a cesarean, you haven't got any concerns, you just want to make sure that you understand how to do a nice lift and relax, then that might be enough for you. So not everyone needs to have an internal, but I would recommend that you feel confident in knowing if you're doing a lift or relax. There's lots of other things you can discuss with the Women's Health Clinic too, like if you've got aches and pains, perhaps you need some exercises for your abdominals, perhaps you want to get some tubey grip, and we haven't even talked about abdominal supports after cesarean, but some sort of support wear around there for the interim while you get stronger. So a women's health physio doesn't just look at the pelvic floor. Hopefully they look at you as a whole person, work out what your goals are. Someone who wants to get back to running marathons is probably going to have a very different goal to someone who just is keen to be able to go for walks and, function day to day pain-free.
So what about taking care of your wound? And I guess after 6 weeks, maybe people wouldn't necessarily call it a wound anymore, but taking care of your incision, because I know there can be some complications that come with having an incision.
Yeah, so scar formation. So from 6 weeks, if you've had the medical tick of approval and you don't have any issues with healing around the wound, look, it's quite interesting. I've actually changed what I recommend in this, and I'm first to put up my hand. I actually want to upskill in the latest research, because I have been hearing, I used to recommend all women to do scar massage from 6 weeks, but I do think research is rapidly changing, and I don't provide that as a blanket recommendation. Definitely more selective, because some women, I think there's differences with scars. If you've got a keloid scar versus if it's healing really well, if you've got hypersensitivity versus reduced sensitivity. So there's lots of different reasons why scar massage might be appropriate or why it might not be appropriate. So if you've got any concerns about your scar being oversensitive or undersensitive, so it's feeling numb, have a chat to your physio or your doctor. If you're worried about any the keloid scar formation where it's thickened and quite pink, then also I would seek that individual support.
So why would that be important then? What are sort of the long-term implications of just leaving the hyposensitivity or hypersensitivity?
Well, I once had a woman come to see me because she was about 10 months after birth. She said her scar was so sensitive she struggled to change her baby's nappy and lean on the change table.
Wow.
And she said she hated her husband putting his hand, when they were being intimate, putting his hands anywhere near her scar. And it's not just a physical, there's an emotional and, all those sides of things associated with having a scar. So look, for some women, the scar just heals beautifully by itself with no intervention required. For other women, they do need help support. We used to think that scar massage helped with the tissue formation, and it can in certain circumstances. It can help reduce the scar. So, yeah, if it's bothering you, check it out.
I did want to ask, because I found working and rehabilitating with physios in the past, you do really bond with them. And like you were saying, there is an emotional side of this rehabilitation and learning about your body and, things that you can do and I guess the progress that you make over time. Do you have any advice for women who might be feeling overwhelmed or anxious about their caesarean section recovery?
I think it's totally valid to be concerned about your recovery. Ultimately, we all want to get back to feeling normal, whatever normal is for us, right? And this is where I think having a game plan after your caesarean can be really helpful in terms of how you're feeling. I feel like it's whenever we feel out of control, that's when the overwhelm starts. So if you can put some even small measures into place to have a bit of a plan of action after having a baby, then please, do that. My podcast hopefully will help with that as well if you want to check out the Fitness Mama podcast. So if you're feeling overwhelmed, check out some of those episodes because there's some amazing ones. So whether or not it's podcast, doctor, if you're feeling overwhelmed, please come and send me an Instagram message or yourself, Amber. There's so many lovely things we can do to help support you.
You did touch on earlier sort of the healthcare around, postnatal rehabilitation and pelvic floor rehabilitation and how, you have knee surgery and then you've got this amazing rehab program that's sequential, like you were saying. And then, women do have babies and then it's, you leave the hospital and it's okay, well, you're on your own now, depending on what kind of care you have as well. But I wondered for you as a physio, what do you think a woman's recovery after a cesarean section would be if we had appropriate and adequate rehab and healthcare around it?
Well, we need to do a research study on that, don't we? But I do know that, you know, let's not talk about cesareans necessarily, but the healthcare, billions of dollars is spent a year, every single year, billions of dollars on incontinence. And sure, these are often older people and older women, but we know pregnancy and childbirth have a big risk factors in incontinence. And this is just one example, whether or not you've had a cesarean or a vaginal birth. And then we've got menopause on our doorstep. And by the time we all have reached menopause, no matter if we've had a vaginal birth or a cesarean, we're all at the same risk as each other in terms of incontinence and all those lovely pelvic health issues. So I would hope, and again, we need research study on this if you're volunteering, Amber, but that alone, if we could help support women earlier, will that help with how many billions of dollars we're spending on healthcare for this issue later on in life? You know, then there's the mental health side of it. Supporting our bodies to recover can help us. Yes, they can help us physically, but what about mentally? So I think there's so many, and this is such a broad question, but there's so many avenues that having that support, like, there's so many ways that can help us physically, mentally, our mind, body and soul, you know, how we're functioning as a family, our relationship with our husband, our relationship with our kids. Like, yeah.
I sort of see it as like a preventative in a way. Like I imagine a lot of women I forget the stats, but, you know, there's like well and truly over 50% of women with pelvic health issues are living with treatable conditions and they don't even know it. So I definitely see that as a preventative.
100%. And as a physio, I think things have changed in the last few years, which is great. But as a physio, I used to mostly just see women in the clinic when they already had the issues. You know, they already had the leaking or the pain or whatever concern it was. Whereas these days, and like this is exactly why I developed my program, because I was like, there's so much we can do preventatively to help either prevent these issues occurring or to help manage them earlier, get on top of them earlier. So, yeah, I'm all about preventative healthcare. I think, you know, even there's now, if you have a hip replacement, there's prehab. So they get people in for a burst of exercise because they've found that helps with surgical outcomes. So prehab and then your surgery and then rehab. So, yeah, there's so many ways that I think that preventative, being a bit more proactive about it all can help.
I honestly, it couldn't come fast enough, but I'm hopeful for the future. I really am. My last question to you, I just often find that cesareans get left out of physio care. Right. So a lot of the time it will be birth injuries to do with the vagina and pelvic floor. But, you know, and I had a friend who had a planned cesarean and, you know, knew all about physios and things. And, you know, she's my friend, so why wouldn't she? And she asked in hospital if she could see the physio in hospital because she had some questions. And they told her, well, no, your case doesn't grant a physio visit, and declined her. And I talk about this all the time. But like that shocked me because you have this woman who's asking and who knows and wants answers and yet can't be provided with them.
Yeah.
Well, I don't know. What do you think about that as a physio hearing that and working in a hospital?
Yeah. So having worked in hospital, and it's a very different in the private versus public sector, but you go on to your shift. You're given a list of people who've given birth that day, and then you have to prioritise them. Who really needs to see you versus who, you know, who would it be nice to go and have a chat to? And the people that are higher on the list are those that, so one example is if they've got issues with urinary retention and you need to perhaps do a bladder diary to work out if they actually need to have a catheter of some sort. There's other women that have had 3rd and 4th degree perineal tears where we know that we need to help with their management early to help reduce their risk of issues with like fecal incontinence and those sorts of things. So those 2 conditions are always like right there, priority. Pain is a big one. We'll treat. If there's anything that's stopping them from being discharged, we'll go and help them, whether or not that's with aids. Like there are so many different types of women that give birth. So some of them might already, for example, be wheelchair bound or have gait aids or there's just everyone, like all women can give birth. So there's lots of different conditions that we have to deal with. So when you're in the hospital system, there's those that need a physio in order to be discharged. So if you've had a caesarean, recovery is pretty standard, no specific issues, they probably would have been lower on the list, which isn't good. Like, I totally agree. It comes down to funding, doesn't it, in hospitals?
Yeah, totally. And I mean, we don't have enough women's health physios as it is. They were saying that where the demand is so high and the supply is so low. And so when people go and book for a physio, it's really difficult to get into. I don't know about where you live, but that's certainly the case where I am.
Oh, I heard last week of a physio clinic having to close down one of their clinics because they didn't have enough staff, and it was a staffing issue, not so much anything else.
Yeah, it's really sad.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much, Kath. This has been nice to chat with you and get to know you a little bit better. And thank you.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.
And before I sign off, remember my team and I will be putting together the show notes for this episode with all the links, including how to check out the original podcast episode this was on, which is Can We Talk About This with Amberlee? And don't forget, as always, slide into my DMs on Instagram. I love hearing from each and every one of you, whether or not you've got a question or a request for a future podcast episode. Send me a DM at fitnestmama, FITNESTMAMA. And that's it. Have a fabulous day, and I look forward to you joining me very soon for another episode of the Pregnancy, Birth and Recovery podcast. Thanks for listening to the Fitness Mama podcast, brought to you by the Fitness Mama freebies found at www.fitnessmama.com/free. So please take a few seconds to leave a review, subscribe so you don't miss an episode, and be sure to take a screenshot of this podcast, upload it to your social media, and tag me at fitnessmama so I can give you a shout out too. Until next time, remember, an active pregnancy, confident childbirth, and strong postnatal recovery is something that you deserve. Remember our disclaimer, materials and contents in this podcast are intended as general information only and shouldn't substitute any medical advice, diagnosis or treatment. I'll see you soon.